from the top.
Okay.
Let's take 3.
Okay.
I'm a better carpenter than Jesus. That was my reply. A friend was trying to gain some understanding about my prowess for building and woodworking, and I knew since he had no personal experience in that area, that any description that I could render would probably only make things more confusing for him. So I decided to be brief, and I just said, "Hey man, I'm a better carpenter than Jesus." He laughed, and so I knew I was onto something, and I kept going. "Yeah," I said, "and then I'm going to make orange t-shirts with a graphic of a hammer and a framing square, like mocking the old Soviet hammer and sickle thing. And then my slogan above it, I'm a better carpenter than Jesus, with an advert line below, Home Depot, where projects come to get saved. And then I'm going to make blue and white bumper stickers with the same slogan and go to Lowe's and plaster them all over the trucks in the parking lot." Now, I knew this would be insulting to some, my sacrilege, but well, that's pretty much the point. Besides, comparing oneself to Jesus' skills as a carpenter, well, come on, there's no real evidence he was any good with tools. I mean, it was his old man who was the carpenter. They just assumed that Joseph passed on some of the family trade. And to be clear, considering the times back then, it would have really meant something closer to handyman or jack of all trades. In short, it doesn't take a lot to be a better carpenter than Jesus. So in the end, it's really just faint praise. But then on the other hand, I can't fish at all. And I hear he might have had a knack for that sort of thing. So, okay, great. He's got me there. But then again, I'm not sure that the way fisherman was used to describe him wasn't really just a turn of a phrase. Anyway, I've always been more attuned to Dionysus than Jesus, though they are both versions of the same myth. It's just that Dionysus preceded Jesus by a couple of thousand years or so. Consider this. They both had divine fathers. Both of their mothers were mortal women who ascended, Rhea to Olympus, Mary to heaven. They both died and were reborn. They both were venerated as infants in baskets, Dionysus at Eleusis, Jesus in the manger. They were both called King of Kings. They both had run-ins with local authorities, both political and legal. And they both took issue with the way the state of worship was being practiced during their time. And then there's the wine. Dionysus, the inventor of wine. Jesus turned water into wine. Same difference. I just prefer the classic Greek god for his version of ecstasis over the latter boiled down version. Now, I've been to Eleusis to see the Well of Souls, the Plutonian cave of the departed where Persephone slipped in and out of Hades. I stood in the Telestian theater and recited poetry, just as a way of saying thanks and to feel like a part of the tradition. And as I recall, I even drank some wine across the street just to complete the ritual. But I have no need, a bending need in a cathedral, to pretend to eat the flesh and drink the blood of Christ. Way too abstract and macabre for my taste. But I do appreciate what Madonna had to say about the crucifix. What's not to like about a hot, half-naked guy nailed to a cross? Indeed, the only time I can think of when I really felt cornered, boxed in, dare I say, persecuted, was when I'm inside churches. During modern ceremonies, things like funerals and weddings in the 20th century. I can't imagine anything more stifling and soul-crushing. Let's all gather around the dead person in the box at the front of the room, a place where we would probably usually never be gathered together in the first place, and we'll just suffer the tension rather than celebrate the release. Speaking of dead bodies in churches, you ever been to one of those weddings, orchestrated by who knows whom for God knows what reason, to put on display some poor couple yearning for togetherness they presumably already possess, but are burdened with the agenda of official sanctioning of their incommunicable commitment? No thanks. Although I have to admit, I was married twice, neither time indoors in a church, and well, those didn't work out well at all. So what do I know about any of that? Regardless, formal, institutionalized religion is the single most oppressive experience I've been asked to endure. So I avoid it like the plague. Really, when I think about it, Anything that becomes too organized, codified, too fundamental in nature is oppressive to me. Likewise, I have certainly known my share of yoga people too, who were just as stifling in their rigidified attitudes towards life. And bankers and lawyers, geez, don't even get me started. I hadn't thought about it much, but it seems I've spent more time avoiding being cornered than I realized. And now I can see I've been rounding corners my entire life.